What's up, amigos? Commander Jaime here. This time we got top 8 at the ARG Secret Series Easter Extravaganza. So, Card Fighters Underground had their own ARG Easter event this weekend, and I decided to take Shiranui, or Shiranui, however you want to pronounce it. So, it is the ninja way. So, for those who don't know, Nubatama was my first clan into the game, and so ever since then I've been basically just keeping up to date with it. And GBT14 was very kind to them, and so I figured I'd take advantage of it and decided to take it to a bigger event. This will be an in-depth deck profile, as I decided to have a game plan for this type of build. And what I mean by that is that the new Shiranui Grade 3 and Grade 4 are very solid cards. They're very strong, and Renee can be much more impressive than Chaos, and that's like, what? So there's a specific integration what I'm talking about. What I mean by that is that the on place or on stride for Zanki is not once per turn. So if you get the first stride turn, you get to ride Grade 3. You can dominate one of your opponent's units and attack. Then you perform stride. You stride onto Renee on Zanki, and you can proc again the skill once again. So then you get another dominated attack at that point. Each of those attacks are getting plus 2k, so they're steadily increasing a bit. Then you have Renee, or Ren, however you want to pronounce it. I go with Renee. So Renee has the effect you can do on first stride too. Just counterblast, flip a copy. Your opponent has to call 2 cards from their hand, call into separate rearguard. They get plus 5 until the end of the turn, and they have to attack the Vanguard one at a time, essentially. And that is 4 dominated attacks. Not only that, Renee rips 2 cards out of them, and those perform the attacks too. So, and you have other cards that help make better numbers, such as your starter Madoy and the new Frog unit, and so on. So you can have those attacks hit. So that can be very devastating against most decks, especially if you're thinking about it. That's 4 dominated attacks plus your Vanguard, your 2 rearguard columns. So in total, you have like 7 attacks. And if you play the stance, which I do, you can get an 8th attack essentially, because I usually do the rearguard, then the Vanguard, and then the last rearguard column. So yeah. So the game plan was to capitalize on this interaction, and so I built my deck around that. Also, if you come back to your second stride turn, their other skills become live. Where Zanki has the beginning of the right phase, Soul Blast 1, you draw a card. And then both you and your opponent must call a card to the rearguard. This is good because you can call something like Metsu or the new Grade 2 Liquidation. So that way, when you on stride, you get to see the dominated attack and you can pay the cost to get their skills off and so on. Also, it rips a card out of the opponent's hand on top of that. And it gives you a target to dominate with the on stride skill. So that's big. And also building your advantage too, since you're plussing 1 technically. Renee's other skill is GB3, which is something not to be reckoned with. It's plus 10k and a crit to every dominated attack. So your on stride will see that if you're GB3 live right at that moment. So if you took over a Grade 2, it become 11k thanks to Zanki's power up. And then with the 10k and the crit, it becomes 21k plus crit and attack. So at 4 damage, your opponent can potentially lose. And then follow up with the Renee. It's just plus 15 in total to those units call from the hand and plus crit. It's very devastating, and so like I said, my game plan was to capitalize on that. Also, one more thing is that Nubatama does have some weaknesses, and one of the major weaknesses that I noticed is that Nubatama doesn't like to be rushed. So if there's a way to not rush, or not get rushed, I mean, that'd be greatly appreciated, because most of your cards you want to save until your domination turns. And a lot of them are GB locked too, so I went a different route too. And some people in OCG are playing basically the vanilla units to help with that, and I am playing some of those. And thanks to that, I'm also able to rush in the early game and not get basically a backlash from it, and I can still maintain some advantage and still apply the pressure. And because I'm applying early game pressure, your opponent has either 2 options. One, they don't call rearguards and they just eat everything to the face, which is probably bad for them because that puts them to like 4 to 5 damage by your first stride, especially if you're contesting for it. Or if they start calling rearguards, then you can like pick up some of their rear guards and leave some intentionally, so that way when you ride a grade 3, Zanki has a target to grab, essentially. So that's why I don't even play the new starter, because I can generally somewhat force my opponent to already have a rear guard, and then Madoi just helps with that plus 3k, making those numbers hit the 11k or the 16k mark. So without further ado, let's just get into it. So for our starters, we're playing Madoi. The reason I play Madoi is because that plus 3k actually really does help. Again, it passes the 11k or the 16k thresholds that you want to pass when you dominate in units. Also, because I play an aggressive early game, if I can, it forces the opponent to call rear guards in the early game, so then I don't feel like I need the need for the new starter, essentially. So that's why. Also, I usually put this on my rear guard columns, and with that, he could be a booster for anything like the stride fodder or the draw trigger or your grade 2s later on in the early game, to help you push aggressiveness. Kind of like the Grenache Necrobone column that you would put in Nightrose. Also, in like the Chaos matchup, what I've done and what I've noticed from OCG players is that they start calling extra cards. Like the draw trigger is a good example if they call it to like the other side of the column and the back row. So when you're contesting for first stride, they have to ride Chaos Crisis, and Crisis lets you choose what to lock. So if you choose like the draw trigger somewhere else, then Madoi is still safe technically. The only way they can lock Madoi on their own accord at that point, at that grade 3 turn, is Photon. So if you can get away with that, then when you first stride, Madoi can go into Soul and you get the draw. So that helps out too. Just thought I'd give that little tip. I'm going to be going over it in a kind of different pattern. I'm going to start with my starter, do it with the grade 1s, then go with the grade 2s, and then go with my grade 3s, and then do the trigger lineup. I think it makes more sense, kind of like as you would build up and ride up to your mid-game and end-game. So I'm going to go off with the grade 1s now. For the basics, I'm playing for the 4 PG and the 4 stride fodder. The 4 PG, I was thinking about the dominate one, where when one of your dominated unit attacks hits, you can grab that PG by binding another copy from drop, and it comes back to your hand from drop. So that sounds really good. However, since my endgame is focusing on early aggro and pushing that first stride turn very disruptive, more than likely those dominated unit attacks will not hit by the second stride and after. One reason because of Renee's GP3, which is crit, so if they're at 4, they're going to die. If they're going to be at 4 or 5, they're going to guard those dominated attacks. And at that point, you kind of appreciate the countercharge PG at that point, because more than likely it will be more than used than the other one, in my current build at least. So the countercharge is greatly appreciated still. If you end up riding it, you can Soul Blast it with Zanki or the G-Guard Kohorokan, where it's the one that counterblast Soul Blast, grab a grade 1 from their back row and dominate it into the Guardian Circle. So that's one way to get into drop, and then when you PG, you can countercharge. The stride fodder, I play 4 of. 2 reasons. You want to make sure you're on Zanki more than a Boro, and I do play the other grade 3. That's not a Shiranui or a Dominate on stride, so you definitely don't want to ride that card. I had a mirror match with my friend Dirk from Card Fighters on the Ground. He's the owner, and he got stuck with riding that one dude. Not a good game for him. So definitely, this guy's definitely appreciated. Doggo over here. And one of the things I like about him is that he's one of those units I can call my grade 1 turn to start attacking. So my ideal grade 1 turn is that I will ride this 8k vanilla. Yes, I do play 8k vanillas. I'm playing 3. I'm also playing 5 of the grade 2 10ks, so a total of 8 units that are vanilla. But the idea is that this is an 8k Vanguard, and then I can have Madoi boosting the Shred Fodder, so it's a guaranteed 12k attack. So that way, just like in Nightrose, I would usually attack with Vanguard first, and if I got a trigger, regardless if it's a stand or a crit or a draw or something, give it to the other column, so it's guaranteed to hit. If they get a trigger at their 6-7k base, it's still gonna hit because it's like a 12k column. The 8k has its benefits. So one of the things that I definitely appreciated was the 8k base. It came up a lot in my matchups where I contest for first stride, so I stayed at grade 1 most of the time, an extra turn, if they made me go first. So then at that point, they'll have to ride to grade 2 first, and then I ride to grade 2. So I'll get that first stride, no problem. Don't have to worry about that Sabreeze, and I don't have to worry about like rewriting grade 2 just so I can deny the Sabreeze, because at that point you're minusing 1. So yeah. The other thing, it helps against being rushed back in a sense where like if you didn't have anything to call, you're on an 8k base and your opponent can just drop a strike fodder and attack you because it's only 7k. They need to call an extra card to have a booster to hit. So it forces them to call another card, which is bad for them, especially since you will dominate any of the rear guards, and you can like dominate them and attack the other rear guards. Essentially dwindling their resources on the field that way. I only played 3 of the 8K. I was tempted to play 4, but the Frog and the Stride Fighter and the PGs are just really good. And at the mid to late game, the 8K does become kind of useless. There are ways to help with that, and I'll get to that when I get to the other cards. But ideally, you want to see like the Frog in the mid to late game. Once this thing goes off, it helps you so much on your dominated attacks and your draw. The Frog, all it does is when a dominated unit attacks, you can put it into Soul, give that unit plus 6k for the battle, and you draw a card. It helps dig deeper into your deck for an extra card too, and it helps for that dominated attack to actually be something to be reckoned with, forcing the opponent to drop like 1 or 2 cards or even more. Primarily, I try to save them for the Reneko, because they usually try to call like 4k triggers. Ideally, the opponent wants to call their draw triggers because it's like the least shield and it's like the weakest attack. So having that guy giving it a plus 6 and the plus 5 from Renee makes it a 9k plus 6, so 15k. So it hits. And if they call like a vanilla trigger, the 5k, it actually hits that 16k threshold. So it's just good. Now, following up with your grade 2 turn, you ideally want to ride the 10k base. I am playing 5 copies of it just so I can definitely have that fight for first stride, much more effectiveness. And also again helps against the early rush that your opponent can give you. So again, if they call a 9k, they need to call a booster to pass that 10k threshold. Otherwise, they can't hit, forcing the opponent to call more rear guards than they really want to. Again, I seen builds that play like 8 grade 2s instead, and I felt like Metsu over here and Liquidation are really good rear guards, and my build is still geared to go into the mid game and even to the late game if it comes to it. So having these guys available to you is very important, and it helps you keep advantage while popping down these units. Metsu, when you put it on Vanguard or Rearguard, you get to bind a card from the top of your deck face down. And then when it sees a dominated unit attack, you can counterblast 1, get one of those cards that are face down from your binding zone, add it to your hand, and it gets plus 10k. So it's a 19k beater, which is fantastic. So it's a great unit to actually abuse the stand triggers with if you drive check them. Also, the stand trigger that I'm playing is the After Image one. It gives it plus 3, so it passes that 21k mark. And if you shuffle it back, you can attack with it. And then if you stand the trigger, if you drive check, you stand them, and it's just benefit. The Liquidation is also really good because it's an 11k attacker if you have the Shiranui name. And the other skill is basically at the end of the battle that one of your units attacked, you can counterblast, kill it, and you draw a card. This applies to also the dominated units, so you can get rid of your opponent's resources while getting an extra card for you. So it's good. And again, these cards give you a card back, so you can plop these down and not lose hand advantage, which is big. You want to make sure you have a good amount of hand size, so you keep guarding and you just keep applying the pressure with the domination attacks and these guys beating them down. And then, again, going back to the 10 case, they do the work in the early game, and then you can make some nice numbers with them later on too. If you have a 10k with a 7k booster like your Strike Fighter and you're on a Mujin lower turn, you can give it plus 4 and it makes a 21k mark. If you give it plus 3, it hits 11k mark and you can restand it. If you give it plus 3 and have the 8k boosting it, you hit 21k that way too. After that, like the mid to late game, you can start like dropping these guys for guard or something, or just stride with them if you need to. Also, to go with bigger numbers with Metsu, if you have a 7k booster, you can make that 26k line as well. One of the things you can do with Liquidation, if you're past the Renee effect and you like draw Liquidation due to like a Frog or your Madoi, you can call it, and then if you have like the 8k or the grade 2 just chilling there, after they attack, you can pay the cost to counterblast, pop them, and get a new card. So essentially you kind of cycle through it, but you still get the benefit of calling this card or something else that you kind of don't want to call, but you want to. The reason you don't want to call it is because you want to keep hand, but then you need some pressure. So you call that card anyway because you can dispose of it. And then with Liquidation, it gives you the card back essentially. So you could do little stuff like that too. And the reason I went with 4 Metsu over the Liquidation, because I felt like Metsu was just a better card in most situations, especially if they had a damage check like trigger, and 19k still hits over 16k, whereas in Liquidation needs a booster at that point to hit that 16k mark by himself. Just to further demonstrate, it's just basically my grade 1 turn looks like this, and then I'll just attack like this, or like this. That gives you the guaranteed hit. So it's 2 attacks that they have to guard against or deal with. And also you can attack with this first and then with your Vanguard if they have like rear guards, just to get that extra poke. And then they sometimes end up taking the Vanguard anyway, even though it's unboosted, because they need the Counterblast in some decks. So that's a plus. And then following up with your grade 2 turn, you can end up with a board like this where you have this L shape, and so you can attack in this pattern essentially. And if you get the stand trigger, you can stand this guy too to get the benefit. And this also hits the 9k threshold as well. So you can keep doing this pressure in the early game and be feeling safe with a 10k base. So they might end up just attacking your rear guards, which is okay. The point is they did their job on applying pressure. So now they have rear guards too, more than likely. And then you just ride a grade 3 and go from there on your stride turn. So for the grade 3s, I'm playing 7 grade 3s. I haven't had any issues with riding. One of the things I was trying out first was the full Shiranui lineup, so I didn't have this guy at first. But I felt like I really needed that extra grade 3 that did something at rearguard, and so this guy is perfect. For those guys that don't know, is this Vanguard or rearguard circle GB1. You can rest one of your units, and your opponent chooses one of their units and gives it +3, and if they did, this guy gets 10k. So he becomes a 21k beater. You can rest other units like the Frog, and it doesn't negatively impact you, because then the Frog will just go into soul and draw you another card. So that's very helpful, and I would not suggest bumping this up, because the more you bump up this guy, the more likely you ride it. Again, against Dirk, it hurt him in the Shiranui mare. He was playing 2 copies, and he ended up having like both of them at that one game, and he had to ride one of them. So back to the Shiranui. You definitely want Zanki at 4 of. Zanki is just, like I said, with that interaction on first stride, you can basically win on first stride. The beginning of the first couple of rounds, I actually like won some games on first stride. It was very quick. Both round 1 and round 2, I had like 20 minutes to spare because my games went pretty quick. Like I said, with his abilities, they're really solid. Gives you that draw, forces a card out of the opponent from the right face skill, and then abuse with the domination skill. And with the Boro, I really like them because of the domination on stride more than the name. Because you stride Rene, so you have the name anyway. It doesn't really matter that much. But you definitely want to stride and get a domination off, basically. Especially once you start hitting GB3 with Rene. That on-stride dominate, it's whatever that is, that thing is getting +10k in the crit. It's so very devastating, and that's just by striding, again. So one of the things that happened in the tournament is that I misrode Oboro. And I was facing Nightrose, my friend Jaime, also named Jaime, right? And my second stride turn basically came around, and at the beginning of the right face, I had made him call a grade 3 OG Nightrose because he cleared his field because of the new Nightrose stride, hollows everything. So I call something, and then because it's still at the beginning of the right face go, you then go into your right step, and you can ride Zanki, and you can get the dominate right then and there. And so I made him get poked by the OG Nightrose that I call from drop immediately. Then stride into Rene, get another poke in there. And then Rene rips 2 more cards out of them and hits him again. So that was a funny interaction that I got through. What intentionally was a misride at first turned out to be actually pretty helpful against a matchup like Nightrose because they clear the field. So it's definitely appreciated having Oboro there. For the triggers, I am playing 6 crit. I am playing 3 stands and 3 draws and the 4 heals, of course. I'm going to go over with the crits first. So there's a lot of builds that play around the Noroi and the Torsada ratios. Noroi is the Shiranui crit. When your Vanguard attacks with Shiranui in the name, go into Soul, get you a card, and it gets +5. Where Torsada is the one put into Soul, countercharge. Kind of like a Supersonic clone, essentially. So what I found myself, and of course with moderation and your resource management in Counterblast and Soul Blast, I appreciated Noroi more. Part of the reason is because he can be a booster or an attacker when you need it to, and you don't lose a card because of it. So that's great. And it fuels the soul for Zanki, so that way you don't have to worry about it. And one of the things that I like to do is have it a booster, let's say for Metsu. Metsu becomes that 21k mark with that kind of booster. And then when you attack with Vanguard, you swoop it in, and if you hit a stand trigger, Metsu gets stand, right? Another thing was that you can do the same thing with like a 10k vanilla that's just chilling there from the early game. Now it becomes a 14k attack, and then you just swoop it up. Another interaction is that if you have the after image stand trigger go off to give the +3, or your draw trigger to Metsu. Metsu is 22 on his own with a +4k booster, hits that 26k mark. Also, with the 8k vanilla, you can have this as an attacker or a booster, so it hits that 12k mark. Also, you can have Noroi be rested by the grade 3 rearguard that becomes a 21k beater. So, and one of the things to note is that if they don't have the PG for the Vanguard, it becomes harder to guard the Vanguard attack because it's 31k, essentially. Or more, if you have more. Torsada, like I said, I think 2 was fine for me, and I didn't have any counterblast issues in the tournament. I was able to carefully moderate my counterblast and making sure that I don't fuck myself with resources. So that's one of the things you gotta watch out for. And honestly, I'd rather see him in the mid to late game where more than likely I'll see a 1 copy at that point. And at that point, I can dictate if I want to guard with it or keep it in my hand where I might need the counterblast. And sometimes I may use it just to overextend because, you know, you can go hand with 3 or 4 counterblasts in a turn, but more than likely you're going to use 2 to 3, more maybe like 2. I've noticed myself I was using 2 counterblasts a turn because one for Renee, one for one of your grade 2s that actually have a skill, and then your other column could be like the grade 3 that's 21k beater, or your like vanilla column that's still like from the early game. So I have no really issues with counterblast again. So that's why I went that route. Now for the other triggers, 3 stands and 3 draws. So this trigger ratio I had messed with since GPT 11 and I've liked it. The reason I picked this ratio is because I wanted something from the stand trigger, this one in particular, and also the crit pressure is there, and then also some draw trigger to help out with advantage on a damage check or on a drive check here and there. So I ended up playing this ratio, and to be honest, I kept with it, and I didn't feel like I did the wrong decision. Some people play differently too, and that might impact their like ratios. But what's nice with the after image stand trigger, it does a lot more than you would think, and that's one of the things that I appreciated. I use it mainly for the effect, and the stand trigger, if I drive check it, it's nuts. It's a benefit at that point, essentially. The effect is basically when you have less cards than your opponent in hand-wise, and GB1, you can draw a card first, which is big, and then shuffle this guy back and give something +3. So depending on what you draw, you can distribute your 3k more efficiently to something that may... It's like, oh, I'm going to put it on this attacker, but then you draw something, and it's like, wait, I'm going to put it on this boosters, because now I can make easier numbers on both my columns, which is big. Once you're hitting like certain thresholds on both your columns, you're doing something right. So you're making the opponent drop in more cards in that sense. One of the neat interactions you can do is on Zanki's right face skill. You can call this if you have like less cards than your opponent, and more than likely you will, because it's right after their turn that they got some cards back and they attacked you, so you've guarded, and so you're at that moment in time you may have a few cards less than them. So you can like call this from Zanki's skill why they call something, and then this can go get you something to dig deeper. And sometimes you may be short a card to stride with, like a stride fodder or a grade 3, or you're literally starving with grade 1s and grade 2s that like, fuck, I need to pitch 2 cards for stride, I need to dig deeper. And that gives you like the extra, you know, fetch for it, essentially. And hopefully you draw something pretty good. And one of the other reasons I really like it is the trigger that goes back to deck. The fact that you can put triggers back to deck in a lot of decks is very valuable, like such as Mick for Nightrose. So then your turns become more scarier where you attack with the rear guard and then you attack with the vanguard. You're either going to get a crit, a draw, a heal, or a stand. And your opponent doesn't want you to see a crit or a stand, and your stands are going back into deck essentially. So you're more than likely going to see them, and your drive checks are just drawn to them. And they're 10k shields, so they have some shield value essentially. And again, like one of the things you can do with the 3k power-ups, you can make a Metsu over the 21k mark. The 10k vanilla boosted with the 8k again, that makes a 21k column. It makes the grade 1 8k become an 11k. And then again, with the Noroi crit, you can give the Metsu +3 and it makes that 26k line essentially. And it goes on. There's multiple ways. And if you have like 2 of these in hand for some reason, you can go out with both of them and you just return 2 stand triggers to your deck, and your opponent's just like, what the fuck? And you're powering up your field slowly but surely, but it makes a hell of a difference is what I'm getting at. And like I said, the draw triggers are really mainly for like the damage checks and the drive checks to help you get that extra card, and you just drop it for shield. Or if you draw this from your like mulligan, you can just drop it in front of your Modoi, so it's a 9k column, and you can just, it's okay, it's a 5k shield, so it's whatever at that point. So you can apply that early pressure. And then of course the 4 heals. This is the counter charging or soul charging heal that Nubatama got. It's really good. This along with the PG helps you counter charge efficiently. And what's really nice is that since you counter charge, you can make the Kohoricon free essentially from the counterblast perspective, so that way you can still go into your turn, or you can guard to unflip further for potentially a Drachma turn, so that helps. Also, one of the things to note against the ZTB matchup, this, because it binds itself later on, you can have access to Party Dragon when you dominate it, because you have bind cards. And also, I forgot to mention with Metsu, if you call Metsu early game, your first try Renee, and if they feel like, oh, I'm just gonna call Party Dragon, they can't attack. Because you bounded a card with Metsu, Party Dragon can attack still. So it's a good thing for you. So keep that in mind. Onto the G zone. I play more strides than G guards. I'm just going to show off the ones right now that I actually went into the tournament. So for sure, Rene, like I said, both his skills are very deadly and something to be reckoned with. This makes the Nubatama deck much more oppressive than Chaos. What I really like about Rene and Zanki is that they mesh the domination with the hand ripping, and Nubatama was a clan that started out with binding or discarding cards from the opponents. So having that backed in this kind of form along with the domination as a bonus is very powerful, and I love playing the deck for that very reason. You have control over their hand, and you're just like being very aggressive too on top of that. Aggro decks are fun. So Drachma, I only went into him once, which is fantastic. I did it against the Shiranui mare. So Dirk did something that on the first game we had, where I went into Rene, he decided to overguard the on-stride dominate attack, so he had no hand. And thus making my Rene like just useless. I'm like, wait, what? I can't even, counter blast and make him call 2 cards from hand because he has none. Given that's a risky play, but it does make your Rene useless. And so on the second game, I decided to Drachma just to be safe. Because he only had 2 cards in hand. So it's just like, well, he's going to block him with Rene. Block him on the on-stride when Rene is stridden. And at that point, again, no cards in hand. So, and that's a perfect Drachma opportunity too. And if like he has to discard and he has to write from Soul, he ended up writing the grade 2 10k. And from there, I just won with Drachma. It was also, I mentioned to him and we played it differently, but we later found out there is an interaction that probably people don't know. With Drachma and even like Dus, his skill activates as an auto when placed on Vanguard. So what you do, if you stride over Zanki or even a Boral, when you choose one of their units to dominate and attack, when the attack is about to begin, you must resolve any auto abilities. That's how you resolve like Modoi, Metsu, and Liquidation and so on. And so, thus you have to resolve Drachma at that point. So you pay the cost for Drachma and retire their board except for the dominated unit, because the dominated unit is actually considered your unit at that time. So it doesn't get blown up. First, then the attack will continue, and now they have to drop a card from the hand to guard it or they take it, that kind of thing. And, Drachma forced them to, write something from hand if they have any and drop 3 cards from the hand already. So it's just like really nasty. And then with the interaction with Dus, if you have Tenrei, essentially, their Vanguard would be the 1k power at that point, where your dominated attack is 11k usually. So 11k against their 1k power is a 15k shield. So that matters. Just thought I mentioned it. Also, shout out to Miguel. He let me borrow Drachma for the event. I appreciate it, and I actually used it, so that was great. The sad face is that I haven't used Megiddo competitively in Thavas, only in like testing and mainly in Nightrose for fun, so it was just like, okay. The card I bought I don't use, but the one I borrowed I actually used it. So yeah, I gotta say that. Magan Tembu and Sibris are my other strides that I actually went into the event. Magan Tembu was the awkward position where they get a damage check on ride Zanki. So it's like, is it worth Reneing? And it's like, I don't have the frog to go along with it, so I might as well just take advantage of Magan Tembu as first stride and save my Renees. I did this against my first round against the Thavas matchup, and it was helpful to get rid of the field. And again, for those who don't know, it's just Counterblast, flip a copy. You dominate one of your opponents, and they get +3 for your face up on the card. So first stride will be +3, and then later on it stacks, making it a biggest attack too. And then at the end of that battle, that unit is retired. So it's one way to get rid of units too. That's important. And then the other stride I went into was Sabreeze, of course. There's some games where people just stayed on grade 2, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to Sabreeze. Sabreeze is something that you can abuse in this deck as well, like in Thavas, where your on stride is free. And if you ride, you dominate. On stride Sabreeze, dominate again. So you get 2 dominated attacks on a Sabreeze turn, and then you have your board. And so it's still pressure, and your opponent's at grade 2, so it's like, damn, take all of this. Now for my other strides. These are the guys that I really didn't go into the event at all. So I ended up playing 2 Mugen Lord, 1 GB8, and 1 Mukuro. So there was a time where I felt like I wanted to take out the Mugen Lord just completely out, but I ended up taking out Sukumorikan, the one that's Counterblast to your opponent only keeps 4 cards in their hand and bind the rest. The reason I ended up taking that out, Miguel convinced me to take it out for that way I could just fit in Drachma instead. And because Drachma and Sukumorikan are kind of the same thing, whereas like Counterblast 2 on place, and the Sumurkorin is kind of like situational, where the Drachma can be more devastating too on top of that. And at that point, if you're paying 2 Counterblasts, you might as well retire their board. And if they have the grade 3 to ride, they have to have it or not. Otherwise, they'll lose. So then, thus, I ended up just keeping the Mugen Lord pair, just in case. Somebody named Kyrie was helping me out too. He said that you should keep Mugen Lord for sure for the no-CL geese. So if they decide to geese you, you can still make some numbers and try to finish the game before, they deal damage to you. But there are some scenarios that Mugen Lord can come in clutch, especially if you can full board dominate. I think this would come up more with the Paladin matchups, but I ended up not using it for the event. I did face Brave, but I didn't go farther than second stride, and Rene was like always the best option to do. The GB8, there's the argument that people have dropped this card instead, and I have been hesitant to take it out because it's such a powerful GB8 that once you have the opportunity to use it, it can end the game as well. Because every time your opponent has to guard an attack, they have to drop 2 cards if they call something from hand. And you have to use, your Counterblast or your Soul Blast, so you have the option. So you should have enough resources to do the GB8 on top of that as well. So there's no starving for resources by then either. So that's why I still played it. It could be arguably taken out and put Sukumorikan back as well. So that's that one route. For Mukuro, there is a chance where your opponent may deny you Counterblast by your second or third stride. And thus, Mukuro becomes an option where he only takes 2 Soul Blasts and no Counterblast, and he dominates your opponent's vanguards and they attack their rear guards. So you clear their board, and it's a +1 technically too, because you'll discard 1. And then do a twin drive and then a triple drive in total. So you get the 5 checks in total, in a sense. And if you get any triggers, you can stack them on your Vanguard before your Vanguard actually attacks. So there's a potentially you can get that crit trigger, and inherently your Vanguard would just be crit too before it attacks. So there's always that. So that's pretty cool. But other than that, I just kind of these guys were just sitting in my G zone for the most of the day. But I thought they would be worth mentioning. And like I said, this is something that is still not very solidified just yet, because like I said, I could easily take out the GB8, I could take out maybe Mukuro, or I could take out the Mugen Lord pair for like Sumurkorin and make other choices, 5G guards potentially, all that kind of thing. So if you guys have any suggestions or any experiences about the G zone, guys, feel free to let me know and we can work something out, so that way I can feel more confident in my G zone choices at least. Whereas in the main deck, I'm pretty confident with. Finally, for the G guards, I ended up playing 4 G guards. I played one of the Fighters collection that flips, the Kohorikan as I mentioned. Grab a grade 1 back row and dominate it and put it in your garden circle so you can protect with it. And so it's disruptive against like Negrabone, for example, for Nightrose, essentially. And then you can like stop their multi-attack strategy and it could be devastating too on their turn. And then you could always like steal boosters from certain attacks if you have like an opponent's column that is very big, such as like the Gear Chronicle one, the Lego looking thing. You can grab that, so it won't go to the bind zone. And on top of that, you just took a big ass booster from them, so makes that attack weaker and guardable essentially. Then I played too the new G Guard Gando Korakan. That guy is pretty good actually. The fact that if your opponent has 3 or more cards, he gets +5, and then if they have 6 or more, he gets an additional 10k. So this is a easy +15k shield. G Guard becomes 30k shield worth, and then you just like guard with it. So it becomes a 41k Vanguard that your opponent has to get over, which makes the regular 26k Vanguard attack a 3 to pass, and then you could just throw an intercept or something to make it a no pass. It makes it a lot easier to guard too. The shield value from the Fighters collection there is very hard to achieve because most of the time you just do it just to flip something, so you get closer to your GB8, or increase your power up for your Magentembu or your reach for Mujin Lord and so on. So that's really there why she's there. And the 20k shield can happen if your opponent is basically, they drop all their cards and they attack and they're trying to hope they can win that turn, and you could just drop that and you get that free 20k shield. So there is that one chance that you could actually use her for shield value, is what I'm saying. Some people have dropped her completely too, and I understand that too. I don't know if I want to drop her just yet. I didn't feel like I need the second Gahorakan, because if you time it well on a certain deck, it pretty much does it for you, essentially. And you really don't want to be like wasting another Counter Blast, Soul Blast for a second one if you don't have to, essentially. Because these other G Guards are free. So that way you can save your Counter Blast and even Soul for your Zenki and your Rene abilities. So this concludes my deck profile. I went X1, essentially. There were 5 rounds, and there was only 1 undefeated, so there were 5 X1s. And I ended up with the worst tiebreakers, so I was bumped all the way down to 6th place. So I could have technically been 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 5th place as well. It's just a lot of X1s. But other than that, I felt really good about it because I went X1 with the deck. And some of the games that I had was just very satisfying, finishing on first stride or just finishing early on and having some time to eat my lunch during the rounds and stuff. If you guys have any more questions about my build or even more about my choices, feel free to comment down below. I'm happy to help out. I'm happy to discuss further why I did this. And even if you guys need some help with matchups, I will throw in my feedback too. Oh, fun fact, my deck name for the tournament, I named it something kind of ridiculous, using the Knuckles meme. And it basically said, "My brothers, this is my ninja way." But yeah, thanks again guys for watching. Leave a like, share with your friends, comment down below, and subscribe. See ya!